Every evening, I light this lamp, open a story, and wait. Maybe you're back for another story, or maybe it's your first time here. If you'd like me to read to you again tomorrow, tap subscribe. I'll be right here. And tell me, what time is it where you are tonight? The bench that was always warm, even in winter. I first noticed the bench in the middle of January. It was on the north side of Elm Street, the colder side, the one that never seemed to get direct sunlight during the winter months. I passed it every morning on my way to the corner cafe, my hands deep in my coat pockets, breath visible in front of me like slow-moving ghosts. The park was mostly empty that time of year. Leaves had long since left the branches. The grass was brittle and pale, and even the pigeons seemed more subdued. But the bench, this one particular bench, always had someone near it. Not sitting necessarily, sometimes just lingering. An older man once stood beside it with a bag of bread, tossing crumbs without looking up. Another day, I saw a woman kneeling to tie her daughter's shoe right in front of it. And yet, for all its visitors, the bench remained quiet, understated. I might not have noticed it at all if it weren't for the morning I sat down. It had been a restless night tone of those where sleep only brushes past you, like a stranger in a hallway. I left my apartment earlier than usual, hoping the walk might steady something in me. I reached the park and paused in front of the bench, unsure why. I wasn't tired, really, but something in me tugged, soft and persistent. I sat, and immediately I noticed the warmth, not cold, warm. Not in a way that could be explained by sunlight. There was nor heated coils. This was a wooden bench, slightly uneven, its paint chipped in familiar ways. But the wood beneath me was comfortably warm, like someone had just left, like someone had been waiting. I ran my gloved hand along the backrest. Same feeling, not surface warmth, but something deeper, as if the bench remembered bodies, remembered company. I didn't move for a while. I just sat there, listening to the stillness around me, letting the quiet fill in whatever space the night had left raw. The bench didn't speak, obviously, but it didn't need to. There was something in the way it held Menno tightly, not forcefully, but like an embrace that expected nothing. When I finally stood up, I placed my hand on the seat one last time, still warm. I walked to the cafe, ordered my usual tea, and thought about nothing in particular. But as the steam rose from the cup, curling toward my face like memory, I couldn't stop thinking about that warmth. I passed the bench again on my way home, empty now, silent. But I swore the air around it was softer, like it had been listening, like it had waited for someone to notice. I didn't tell myself I was going back to test it. That would have been too clinical, too removed. But the truth is, when I laced up my boots the next morning and zipped my coat up to my chin, my path was already decided. The park lay in its usual winter hush, branches skeletal against the gray sky, patches of old snow retreating into shadow. But even before I saw it, I knew the bench would still be there. And it was, empty, waiting, just like before. I approached slowly, as if it could sense intention, as if walking too quickly might disturb whatever made it different. I sat, and the warmth met me instantly, familiar, like a scarf worn for years. It didn't creep up. It was simply there, steady, comforting. Not just warmer than the air, but warmer than I remembered it. And this time, there was something else. A scent, faint, almost non-existent, but undeniable. Not perfume, not wood, something simpler, tea maybe, something steeped, something soft. The memory of Earl Grey with honey, or jasmine just after the water cooled. I leaned back against the wooden slats and closed my eyes. Let the scent sit with me. The moment didn't explain itself, and I didn't try to force it. Instead, I let myself fall into the quiet. The kind of quiet where you notice your heartbeat more than your thoughts. And in that space, I began to wonder, who sat here before me? Was it always warm or only after certain people left? Was this place holding on to them piece by piece? Or was the warmth something left behind on purpose, like a message without words? I opened my eyes and glanced around. A woman passed in the distance, dragging a small suitcase through patches of melting snow. Two teenagers threw breadcrumbs toward disinterested birds, but no one looked my way. And yet, I didn't feel alone. Not really. The warmth beneath me felt like presence, not company in the usual sense, but attention. Like the bench knew I was here and was offering something of itself in return. A kind of listening, a quiet nod. I reached into my coat and pulled out the notebook I sometimes carry, the one with more blank pages than words. I didn't write anything, just held it on my lap, thumb against the spine. I wasn't ready to define the moment. Some feelings aren't meant to be shaped yet. They need time. They need repetition. I stayed longer than I planned. Let the warmth seep into my back, into my hands, into something inside me I hadn't known was cold. And when I stood to leave, I didn't look back immediately. I wanted to carry the sensation with me a bit longer. But as I reached the gate of the park, I turned just for a second, and I could have sworn just barely that a small wisp of steam lifted from the wood, like breath, like memory. The next morning I left earlier, much earlier. The kind of early where the sky is still bruised with night, and the streets echo louder under your steps. I hadn't slept much, not restlessly, just lightly, as if my mind was waiting for the day to start. I made tea, poured it into a flask, and slipped it into my coat pocket. I don't remember deciding to go to the bench. I just found my path carrying me there again. The park was darker than usual, the trees skeletal against a barely blue sky, and the air had a different bite to it. Not cruel, but sharp enough to remind me I was alive. As I stepped through the gate, I pulled my scarf tighter. The gravel crunched gently underfoot, damp from the night's frost. I turned the familiar bend, expecting the bench to greet me as it had before, empty, still, waiting. But it wasn't. Someone was already sitting there. A figure, still and upright, hands resting on their lap, face turned ever so slightly toward the rising light. I stopped walking, not out of fear, just surprise. The shape was layered in a long coat, a wool hat pulled low, a scarf tucked neatly under the chin. I couldn't tell if it was a man or woman, young or old, just a presence, quiet, intentional. I stood a few paces away, not wanting to intrude, But before I could decide whether to keep walking or wait, the figure shifted slightly, just enough to pat the bench beside them. A small, gentle gesture like offering a seat at a fire. I moved forward slowly, heart steady but alert, and sat down at the far end. The bench, as always, was warm. That same soft, penetrating warmth that seemed to rise from within the wood. We sat in silence. No greeting, no glance. Just two figures watching the slow unfurling of morning. After a while, I reached for the flask and poured tea into the small cap cup. The steam rose between us. I didn't offer it, and they didn't ask. But when I set it down between us, the figure reached out slowly, reverently, and held it with both hands, sipped once, then twice, then returned it, saying nothing. The warmth of the cup mirrored the warmth of the bench, and something in me exhaled. There are moments that don't need words, only presence, shared breath, shared stillness. We sat like that until the sun crested the rooftops and light began to stretch across the stone. The figure stood, quietly brushing the back of their coat. No urgency, no goodbye. Just a soft nod, not toward me, but toward the bench, and then they walked away. I didn't follow them with my eyes. I just watched the bench. The spot where they had sat still held a shadow of warmth, and their cup untouched but remembered was still faintly warm in my palm. I stayed there for a long while. No thoughts, just sensation. And I began to wonder, maybe the bench wasn't warm because someone had sat on it. Maybe someone sat on it because it was already warm. The following days were colder. The kind of cold that gets into your sleeves and stays there no matter how many times you rub your arms or shift your posture. Still, I returned to the bench each morning, earlier now, before the city truly woke. I didn't say it aloud, but I think I was hoping to see them again. The silent figure with the steady hands, and the kindness that didn't need a name. On the first morning, I arrived 5 minutes earlier than before, sat on the same side where the light caught the edges of the wood, where the warmth settled deepest. I waited. Nothing. The next morning, I came earlier still, made 2 cups of tea, left one on the bench beside me, but no one came. By the 4th day, I stopped bringing the 2nd cup. I didn't want the ritual to sour into disappointment. Still, I kept returning. Not for them anymore, or not just for them, but because the bench still offered something I couldn't find anywhere else. A space where nothing was expected of me, where I could simply be. I began to wonder if the person had been real at all. Maybe my memory had wrapped them in meaning that wasn't really there. Maybe they were just another early riser who happened to pause in the same place I did. But that didn't explain the cup, the nod, the warmth that felt too intentional to be coincidence. Then, one morning, I arrived to find something waiting for me. A small object placed neatly at the center of the bench. It was wrapped in soft brown paper, tied with a single strand of dark green thread. No note, no label, just sitting there, quiet as breath. I looked around. The park was empty. Frost clung to the grass in pale ribbons. Even the birds seemed to hold their distance. I sat slowly, letting my weight settle into the familiar heat of the bench, and picked up the parcel. It was lighter than I expected. Inside was a folded piece of clothold, soft, hand-stitched and wrapped in its center. A single stone, flat, smooth, worn by time and water. On one side, a circle had been etched, not drawn, not painted, etched with care. It wasn't a symbol I recognized, just a simple loop, closed, complete. I held it in my palm and felt the weight of intention. Someone had left this for me, or for someone like me. Someone who noticed, who returned, who didn't ask for anything but showed up anyway. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just sat there, stone in hand, the warmth of the bench beneath me, and let myself feel held. Whatever this was, exchange, acknowledgement, continuation. It didn't need explanation. Some messages don't arrive in sentences. They arrive in presence, in silence, in small, warm things that wait in the cold. I kept the stone with me, slipped it into the small inner pocket of my coat, where I usually kept loose change or a folded receipt I never threw away. It fit there perfectly, like it had always belonged. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even think of it as something worth telling. It wasn't a secret, exactly. More like a quiet agreement between me and something much older, much calmer than explanation. The first few days I forgot it was there. Not really forgot, but stopped checking. And then, slowly, I started to notice things, tiny things. Nothing dramatic, just softness. A barista who usually didn't smile now offered a quiet nod with my tea. The man at the corner store held the door open longer than usual, even though I was still halfway down the sidewalk. Children on the bus giggled at nothing in particular, and for once, it didn't annoy me. I started slowing down more, not out of laziness, but as if I was tuned to a different rhythm now. One that noticed light pooling on a wall in the late afternoon. One that heard wind tapping at the window, not as nuisance, but as voice. At first, I thought maybe it was just the season changing the way winter sometimes yields, not to spring, but to something in between. But then, I'd place my hand over the pocket where the stone sat and feel a warmth there. Not heat, not imagined, just a gentle reminder. I carried the stone without thinking of it as carrying. It didn't feel like an object. It felt like a thread connecting me to that bench, that morning, that person, to the version of myself who had paused long enough to be changed by stillness. One afternoon, as I waited in line at the post office, the woman in front of me dropped her wallet. I picked it up, handed it to her. She looked at me for a long second, not surprised, not flustered, and simply said, "Thank you truly," like those words had more layers than usual. I walked home slower that day, let my hand drift into my coat, fingertips brushing the smooth edge of the stone, and I thought, maybe we all carry benches with us, not made of wood or nails or paint, but of the moments that held us when we didn't ask to be held. Maybe we carry warmth forward into places that never asked for it, just by having once been warm. That night, I placed a stone on the windowsill beside my bed, let it catch the last light of the day. And in the dim quiet of the room, I could have sworn it shimmered. Not brightly, not obviously, just enough to be seen, if you were still enough to notice. I returned to the bench a week later, not because I was looking for anything, not even because I missed it. I just wanted to say thank you. The morning was clear, crisp, with a gentle light that made even the stone path look almost soft. I walked slowly, letting each step stretch just a little longer than needed, not rushing the moment I knew was waiting for me. The bench came into view gradually, revealed with each bend in the path like a memory unfolding, and even from a distance, I could feel it, that familiar hum, that warmth that didn't radiate, but waited to be felt. I smiled to myself, not wide, not for anyone, just the kind of smile you give when you know you're arriving somewhere you've already been welcomed. As I got closer, I noticed something on the bench. Not big, not dramatic, just something placed there with intention. At the very center of the seat sat a small jar, glass, clean, lidded, and inside, folded carefully, a single sheet of paper. My heart didn't leap, my breath didn't catch. It was quieter than that. I sat beside it, the bench as warm as always, and let my hands rest on my knees for a few long seconds before reaching out. The jar was cool to the touch, the lid unscrewed with no resistance. I unfolded the paper slowly. It wasn't aged or yellowed, just soft at the edges. On it, in neat handwriting that tilted slightly to the right, were 3 words. Keep sitting here. No name, no signature, no explanation. But I didn't need one. The message wasn't an instruction. It was a gift, a continuation, a nod from someone who understood what this place had become. I held the note in my lap for a while, then folded it back up, gently, and returned it to the jar. I didn't feel the need to take it with me. It belonged here. I placed the jar back where I'd found it, centered on the bench, and sat quietly beside it. The wind shifted, brushing lightly against my coat. The sun peeked out just enough to light up the frost on the grass, turning the park into a painting of silver and gold. I closed my eyes. I didn't think. I didn't remember. I just sat. And in that sitting, I understood something I hadn't before. This place had never asked anything of me. Not my story, not my name, just my presence, just the willingness to return. And in return, it offered warmth, stillness, and now a message. Whether from the silent figure or someone else entirely, didn't matter. What mattered was that I wasn't alone in this noticing. Others had paused here. Others had been held by the same quiet embrace. And somewhere, someone thought to say, "Don't stop. Keep sitting." So I did. It happened by accident. Or at least, it seemed that way. I hadn't planned on walking with anyone that morning, much less with Mira. We'd run into each other near the bakery, both heading nowhere in particular. She had her scarf wrapped twice around her neck and her hands buried deep in wool gloves, holding a coffee she barely sipped. We talked softly as we walked about nothing of weight, just the kind of light conversation that floats between two people who understand the comfort of not filling every silence. I didn't intend to lead her toward the bench, but my feet knew the way. I think hers followed mostly out of habit. "Is this where you come sometimes?" she asked when we turned into the path. I nodded, but didn't offer more. I didn't know how to explain what this place was to me without sounding strange. The bench came into view, quiet, empty, glinting faintly in the winter morning light. I slowed, unsure if I wanted to share it. Not because I was possessive, but because some spaces aren't meant to be spoken through. Some spaces ask only for breath. Still, she followed without comment and sat down beside me. I watched her out of the corner of my eye, waited to see if she'd notice, say something. But she just crossed one leg over the other, sipped her coffee, and looked straight ahead. "Warm," she said after a few moments, her voice neutral. "Surprisingly warm for a bench like this." I smiled slightly. "It always is." She looked at me then, not suspicious, just curious. "What do you mean?" I thought about how to answer. Thought about the stone in my pocket, the jar, the note, the figure that once nodded toward me without words. "It's different," I said simply. "This spot." Mira nodded slowly. "It's comfortable." She didn't ask questions, didn't press. She just leaned back and sighed, long and low, as though something in her chest had been waiting for stillness all morning. We sat like that for some time, and then I felt it, the wind, gentle, soft, the same way it always passed through this place. But this time, something was off. It didn't move the same way. It hesitated, brushed past me, then faltered, like it didn't know her, like it didn't recognize the rhythm of someone new. Mira didn't seem to notice, but I did, and it made my stomach twist, just slightly. I wasn't angry, just unsettled. I realized then I'd never shared this space with another person, not truly, and I wasn't sure the bench wanted me to. We stayed a little longer, watching two crows bicker near the far end of the grass. Then Mira stood, stretched her arms over her head. "Nice place," she said. "You should bring a book next time. It's perfect for that." I nodded, but didn't answer. She waved and left, walking back the way we came. I stayed seated, waited. The wind returned. Full, even. It wrapped around my shoulders like it always had, and I understood the bench wasn't rejecting her. It just hadn't met her yet. Not like it had met me. Some warmth takes time. Some places need to trust you first. I didn't bring tea that morning. Didn't bring my notebook. Not even the stone. I walked empty-handed, and yet I felt heavier than usual. Not with burden, but with something fuller, like my pockets were filled with stillness, with everything this bench had given me. The sky was clear. The kind of gentle blue that only appears just after the cold has lifted, but before the light sharpens. I walked slower than usual, counted my steps without meaning to. When I reached the path and the bench came into view, it was exactly as it had always been, undisturbed, quiet, with that familiar warmth already waiting. I stood in front of it for a moment, one hand still in my pocket, fingertips brushing the edge of something I had placed there earlier. A simple envelope. Inside it, a folded piece of paper. No explanation. Just a few lines, written the night before when the words wouldn't let me sleep. I sat, felt the comfort of the wood beneath me, and placed the envelope gently on the far side of the bench. It wasn't addressed. It didn't need to be. Whoever it was meant for the bench would know. I stayed seated for a while, letting the breeze do what it always did, wrap around me without pressure, like it was just checking in. I let my fingers rest against the slats, ran my palms slowly along the grain, as if committing the texture to memory. It didn't feel like goodbye, just pause, a shift, the way seasons do, so gradually you barely notice until one morning the air tastes different. I looked toward the path, watched the shadows stretch across the grass. Someone would come. Maybe not today, maybe not this week, but eventually. Someone tired, someone curious, someone open. They'd sit, and maybe they'd feel it, the warmth, the quiet, the welcome. Maybe they'd find the envelope. Maybe they'd leave something of their own, a word, a sketch, a stone. That's how this place works. It doesn't need permission. It doesn't seek attention. It just offers and waits. I stood slowly, brushed off the back of my coat, took one last glance at the envelope. The wind shifted then a little stronger than usual, and for a brief second it felt like someone exhaled beside me. Not behind, not near, just with me. I smiled, whispered, "Thank you," then walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Some places, once they've known you, never really let you go. And their warmth, if you've been quiet enough to carry it, walks with you long after you leave.